Okay, this is, by my count, the 7th video in the year 2024 in which I am discussing news-related things regarding the Xenoblade series and the future thereof. If I remember correctly, in all of those videos, besides the ones about the art book before it came out, I said, alright, this is probably going to be the last piece of news that I have for the series until the Switch 2 reveal when we learn a little bit about the next game. Good news for me though, it's October, which means if they do the same thing for the Switch 2 they did with the Switch 1, they're literally running out of time to say anything else before we actually find out anything about it. And there's a non-zero chance that in between me recording this and it going public, we do find out everything, so if this comes out after we learn any of that, ignore everything in the video because it's probably wrong. Anyway though, this will contain zero spoilers besides one specific thing which I will signpost very heavily. Monolith Soft has a monthly technology blog where they discuss various software, techniques, and technologies that are used to make their games while giving examples of things, and this is extremely useful as a resource, and those frequently also come with links to apply to work with them, and honestly, they're not translated, they're usually very short, and are mostly about fairly nitty-gritty developer techniques that not a lot of people will know about, so I've never thought it was worthwhile covering them. But this time is different because, alongside one of the most significant tech blog updates of all time, we have another recruitment post to work under Tetsuya Takahashi, creator of the Xenoblade series, and an interview with Takahashi and Michihiko Inaba, a programmer on every game in the series, that also sheds a lot more light on things. While there are no official translations for any of this media, the machine ones seem to be doing the job fine, so I am going to rely on them this time. We will be talking about the page on Monolith's website first, as that is very small, and then the interview, and then the video in the background of Monolith's site, because I don't recognize that, and that has me very intrigued. The initial blurb on the site just says, "What is Monolith Soft's R&D department? An independent department within Monolith Soft that is not part of production. So this team does not directly work on any games, but is doing things in the background to facilitate the games being made better. It is responsible for improving the efficiency of the company's overall development environment, researching and developing new technologies, and supporting the development of tools for other sections." Once again, this department is not going to be teasing any new video games. They're not going to be directly working on any new video games. But the exciting thing about this is they, in-house, are working on improving the technological optimization of everything they're working on, developing new technologies themselves, and since Monolith is a support studio for Nintendo EPD, this could bleed over to EPD games as well, and not just the next Xeno thing. And if, say, the people working on Xenoblade 4 need to make some sort of development tool to facilitate something, they would be the ones making that. Also, it kind of goes without saying, but I know at least one person was thinking it, this is a software R&D team, working on new game development techniques, not hardware R&D, working on new physical pieces of hardware that will run games. So no, the Alarmo was not some secret thing Monolith was working on in the background. The positions they're looking for are drawing programmer, as in rendering, animation programmer, development environment engineer, rigging artist, procedural technical artist, and modeling technical artist, which all kind of completely track for R&D, working on new technologies and experimenting with things, even though there's obviously a lot of overlap between that and people who would be working one step down the development pipeline on a finished engine and actual complete game project as opposed to an experimental tech demo. Looking a bit more into these positions, the requirements are also pretty much exactly what you'd expect, as this is R&D and not necessarily a type of work where you would be able to learn on the job. They're looking for more experienced developers, not people directly out of college or the like, and are already expecting some experience, the ability to work in person, a high level of Japanese proficiency, and depending on the position, a lot of things you'd expect a game developer to already know, like C, C++, C#, Python, those kinds of programming languages, Photoshop, Maya, and then Houdini, a software that Monolith has talked about using a lot in recent tech blogs. Speaking of complete engines though, that is probably the biggest bombshell dropped in the interview. Monolith is making what most media covering this information is referring to as a brand new next generation game engine with this team. And more importantly, the division is not new. They are recruiting new people for it now, but it has been in existence for over a year. Instead of immediately jumping to that though, let's actually go through the entire interview. Another reminder that this will be using machine translation, however, multiple versions of that have agreed with each other, and people who speak Japanese but did not have time to make a full human translation of it have said they are satisfactory for getting the message across. Monolith Soft, which has produced many well-known game titles since its establishment in 1999, has organized a dedicated R&D department within the company and has begun full-scale development of technology with a view to large-scale development. We interviewed core members about the background, current research, and future strategy. Part 1. The first step toward creating an organization that enables large-scale development. The interviewer is never directly named, and as they are a representative of CG World, I will simply refer to them as that. Their first question. Today, I would like to talk about the R&D team that has been established at Monolith Soft. First of all, please tell us briefly about the roles of each of you, Mr. Takahashi and Mr. Inaba, in the R&D team. First to respond is Tetsuya Takahashi. In addition to running the company as a director of Monolith Soft, I am also in charge of the development side. I've also been in charge of the R&D team for about a year now. Obviously, besides the R&D thing, Takahashi's roles are public knowledge. He is on the board of directors of the company as a co-founder, but he is not the one completely in charge. The highest up member is Hirohide Sugiura, another one of the co-founders. And while Takahashi does participate in running the company, he is primarily involved in the day-to-day working on projects as opposed to the corporate side. One of Monolith's main development teams appears to be completely headed up by him, and he is the executive director of the entire Xenoblade series, and having as wide-ranging roles as writing some of the scenario and doing the Japanese voice direction for Xenoblade 3 somehow. While the company's website only refers to him as a director, this article also calls him a CCO without actually explaining which of those acronyms it is. Inaba then says, I was originally a programmer, and at Monolith Soft I was in charge of programming the rendering engine for the Xenoblade series. I was a full-time programmer until Xenoblade 3 2022, after which I became a producer and director of the R&D team. This actually answers a question I had back in my Project Legacy video where I was questioning what Inaba was doing and suggesting that if they were working on 2 Xeno projects at once, one remaster and one new game, he might be involved as the director, as he started out on Xenosaga 3 doing collision and control free programming, was credited with just programming on Somabringer, and then was lead programmer of Xenoblade 1 and X, did just plain programming on 2 and Torna, was the director of Definitive Edition, lead programming and technical director of Future Connected, and then back to just programmer on Xenoblade 3, but was not credited on Future Redeemed. So while Takahashi will later state that it's been over a year since the R&D division was formed, it seems like the number is a bit closer to 2, because Inaba implies here that he did not work on anything in between Xenoblade 3 and getting this new position on the R&D team, and obviously that released over 2 years ago, and development and specifically his role on it would have been finished even before then. The next question. Please tell us about the background and purpose of the establishment of the R&D team. Takahashi. Although we established the R&D team, we had been working on R&D for some time before that. Because Monolith Soft is a developer, we have less manpower than publishers. Publishers can easily hire dedicated personnel and take on R&D challenges as an asset of the company, but in our case, since our main focus is on title development, we did not have much room for future investment in personnel. When we were developing Xenoblade 2, we only had a few dozen in-house programmers, and our hands were full with just development, so we were not in a position to organize an R&D team. What he appears to be saying now is that the company is in a much more stable and better position than they were back in 2017 when they were working on Xenoblade 2, so they have the manpower and resources to actually put in a dedicated R&D team when they were just working on that kind of thing on the side as it became necessary with each successive project. And we know the stories of Monolith losing a lot of developers from Xenoblade 2 to make Breath of the Wild that good, and Xenoblade 2 still turned out amazing somehow. So it really seems like a big part of this team is to prevent that from happening. Future-proofing so that no matter what goes wrong, they won't have to scramble like they did back in 2016 and 2017 again. While we know as a fact Monolith has not done crunch since before they started work on Xenosaga 2, Xenoblade 2 cannot have been an easy time to be working there, even if employees were being treated well, just because of the amount of things that needed to be done while understaffed and outsourcing as much as possible, and presumably still needing to hit Nintendo's deadline for the holiday release, which goes a long way to explain why Xenoblade 2 version 1.0, in retrospect, is a significantly worse and borderline unfinished game compared to the state it's in today. Like, honestly, not gonna lie, if someone got Xenoblade 2 at launch, bounced off of it before any of the major updates, and never went back to it, and thinks it's really bad, that is a significantly more understandable point of view than just the blind hatred we usually talk about on this channel, because there were a lot of missing quality of life things, and the game just honestly didn't even run as well back in the day. And someone picking it up after, say, like mid-2018, when most of the updates were out, would get almost a completely different first playthrough experience than someone who first played it in 2017. And that, more than the objective quality of it as a finished package, probably explains more than anything why 2 has such a lower metascore than every other game in the series. This also goes hand in hand with what Sugiura said in his message to fans for Monolith's 25th anniversary not so long ago, where he talked about how you can't get by with small development teams nowadays, and you need large amounts of people putting large amounts of work and have a lot of different teams working in synergy in order to get the best possible product, and also just that game development is different nowadays. Basically, Nintendo's coming out with a new console soon, and Monolith is going to need to work to upgrade their techniques and their technology to properly make use of it, like they've been doing with the Switch for 7 years now. It kind of seems like they were able to make do with retrofitting the Xenoblade X engine to make Xenoblade 2 on the Switch, then kept tweaking that as necessary to get Xenoblade 3 going, but now that we know that they're working on a new engine, they need to kind of restart some things from scratch and relearn how to do certain techniques in a more high-power development environment. Takahashi backs my line of thought up. CGW next asks, so that was the situation back then, and Takahashi responds, that situation continued for a while, but as we began to work with Nintendo to develop titles that would be enjoyed by tens of millions of customers around the world, and as the scale of development became larger, the level of requirements for development also increased. This is more or less saying the same thing I said before, but I don't know what he's talking about tens of millions of customers. He's not talking about Xenoblade, so this must be referring to Monolith's other work on things like Zelda and Splatoon, because those games have actually sold tens of millions of copies. Meanwhile, Xenoblade as a franchise has barely hit 10 million, and you have to count 3.5 versions of just Xenoblade 1 to achieve that. Anyway, Takahashi continues. So, it's no longer the era where you can do it with a small number of people. We thought that we can't rely on human wave tactics forever, and felt that we needed to create an organization that would approach development from a technical perspective to reduce the amount of work required and improve efficiency. That's why we decided to launch an R&D team. Basically, he's saying exactly what Sugiura said a couple weeks ago, and adding on a layer of we need to work smarter, not harder, because we are Monolith Soft. We can't just throw people at the problem like bigger developers like Square can do. So we're going to invent new techniques, master the software we use, figure out how to push the new hardware we're getting soon to its limit like we did with the Switch, and just churn out things that seem like they were made by bigger teams with bigger budgets and more amount of time because we're better than most other developers out there. CG World next asks, what kind of people did you gather for the team at the beginning? Inaba responds, we gathered staff who are basically technically strong TAs, such as people who can write scripts, people who are good at rigging, and people who can use Houdini. We also have programmers who are knowledgeable about building development environments and implementing drawing systems. Now, this sounds like a big machine translation being wonky moment, but it isn't as bad as it looks, because not only does Inaba's sentence in Japanese just have the letters TA, meaning the position of TA, technical artist, but he does also just say the word technical in English. So basically he's saying that they look for people who fulfill the roles of the TA position and are strong on a technical level. They are good programmers and good at using the software and are technical artists as their position. It's a little confusing, but it is still a functional translation. As I mentioned before, they talk about using Houdini a lot in their tech blogs. It seems like a very important part of their pipeline. And he brings up development environments and implementing drawing systems. So Obviously, again, if they're working on a new type of engine, even if it is just a Mark II of their existing one, they're going to need to work on a new development environment. They're going to need to learn how to optimize those for the new hardware, and even again, if the Switch 2 is just an iteration of the Switch where every single component is made more powerful, they're going to need to learn how to properly use that power, even if they can somewhat scale up things they've done already. And new drawing systems, new engine, they might be going for a new visual style, or just a new rendering pipeline. It seems like they've upgraded that on the existing engine a lot of times. Torna specifically used new rendering technology that was not present in base Xenoblade 2, and obviously the engine was iterated on further for Xenoblade 3, as that looks visually even better than 2 did, etc., etc. This all makes sense. Next question. Did those people transfer from the in-house development team to the R&D team? Takahashi's response. Originally, we had a department in charge of TA-like work, and we expanded that. First, we asked Inaba, the head programmer, to join us, and then we transferred TAs and programmers who were involved in title development at the Tokyo office, Nakameguro and Osaki, to join us, and we gradually increased the number of members. This might also be a little confusing. When he says Nakameguro and Osaki, he's not referring to people named those things that joined the team soon after Inaba. He's referring to Monolith's 2 offices in Tokyo. Their headquarters are located in the Meguro ward of Tokyo in a building called the Nakameguro GT Tower, and in 2019 they opened a second Tokyo office in a region of the Shinagawa ward called Osaki. So he's saying that the R&D team was made from people from the Tokyo offices specifically, and he also says they were focused on title development, which is basically the opposite of this new R&D team. These were the people making final game projects, and presumably, since these were the Tokyo offices and not Kyoto, where Nintendo HQ is, these were people working on specifically Monolith Soft games, so these were people taken from the Xenoblade team and whatever other teams were just there working in the background on other things. It would also make sense to have the founding members of your R&D team that are working on things for specifically Monolith Soft projects to come from the team who worked specifically on Monolith Soft projects, because any other games Monolith is known to work on, like Zelda or the other miscellaneous Nintendo properties they do support work on, would be using proprietary techniques to whatever Nintendo EPD division was working on them, and as such would be using different technologies than Monolith Soft would prefer to use in their own projects, so they wouldn't necessarily have as relevant a background to what the goals of this R&D team are. Next question from CG World. How many people do you want to have as a team in the future? Inaba responds, it's difficult to give a specific number, but the more the better. Given the scale of development we do and the rapid turnover of game technology and information in recent years, we want to create an organization that can respond flexibly and quickly. While you could do an uncharitable reading of this and suggest that a technological singularity in game development is forming and Monolith is about to get swept up in the tide, realistically it's just that things are always changing, technologies are always improving, new techniques are being invented, people are finding out ways to get extra drops of power out of systems they didn't think were possible, or just find uses for things that were thought to be useless in the past, and it's good to keep tabs on that so you can improve your own work. It is okay to iterate on other people's work if you don't literally plagiarize. Like that's kind of a thing in just any creative field or science as a whole. That's just kind of how the sum total of human knowledge has increased instead of remaining stagnant for thousands of years. And quite frankly, Monolith as a company has been tied to Nintendo for most of its life now. A lot of employees working at it have never really had to experience a massive technical step up in terms of hardware they're developing for. So, with moving into the Switch 2 era, which for all we've heard is going to be Nintendo's biggest technical leap between generations this millennium, it makes sense to have a dedicated team in place to work on this kind of thing long before the system ever releases. Part 2. 3 roles played by the R&D team. CG World, please tell us more about the role of the R&D team. Inaba, the R&D team has 3 roles: streamlining the development environment for the entire company, supporting tool development for each section, and researching and developing new technologies. Until now, each team prepared their own tools, so in-house tools such as the Jenkins environment, DCC tools, and data converters were duplicated. The first role is to consolidate and manage these in the R&D team. The second role is to consolidate and centralize the in-house tools within the company, develop tools in the R&D team, and provide support to each section. It is difficult with the current size of the team, but we still think it is important to develop tools here. The third role, research and development of new technologies, includes not only research and development of each elemental technology, but also the actual implementation of those technologies. In particular, we would like to focus on research and development related to drawing, lighting, and animation. We also learn about excellent development cases from other companies, document them in the R&D team, and share them within the company. This is not only a very thorough explanation and something I don't really need to comment on much, but again, backing up things I've said already about reasonable things that this team should do. Their goal is streamlining the environment, maybe not necessarily allowing them to make games quicker, but streamlining the process and making things run smoother so they can maybe afford to be more ambitious without worrying about collapsing under their own weight, and standardizing things like various techniques and proprietary in-house tools that are made specifically within Monolith Soft for Monolith Soft use. And yeah, research is an important part of research and development, so it makes sense that they're using case studies from other developers to improve their own. CG World. I imagine that team members are assigned to each task, such as animation-related tasks or development of tools for designers, but how do you manage the teams for each task? Inaba. There's a dedicated team leader for each task, and they are basically in charge of management. However, in order to allow the team leaders to focus on practical work, support such as scheduling and document preparation is handled by the R&D team project manager. This is just him explaining logistics. I do not have any additional comments on this. Part 3. Current research and development. CG World. I heard that the R&D team is currently working on 3 main research and development projects. First, please tell us the details of the first in-house engine development. Inaba. The in-house engine we are currently developing was originally developed for Xenoblade Chronicles, and we are still expanding it. Eventually, we would like the R&D team to fully manage this in-house engine, but at present, since there are many members of the title development section, we are creating various necessary drawings and effect expressions in the form of support and joint development. In the future, we will integrate the developed technology as an in-house engine so that it can be used in other titles. It has only been about a year since the R&D team was established, so we plan to gradually transition the system over the next 3 years or so. This is kind of mind-blowing, because I, and I think many other people, even ones who didn't get this idea from me, were under the impression that Monolith used some engine for Xenoblade 1 in 2010, then when development moved to the Xenoblade X for the Wii U, that came out in 2015, they must have made a new engine for that, then reused that engine for every later HD Xenoblade project. But no, apparently even the X engine was originally used for Xenoblade 1, and that is what is being iterated on again for this new proprietary Monolith engine. But that being said, it's not necessarily wrong or clickbait to refer to this as Monolith making a brand new engine because of 2 factors. The first factor is that this is going to be another major step up. While I'm surprised to find out that the Xenoblade 1 engine was iterated on for Xenoblade X and therefore all of the Switch games, I think it's fairly likely that there was a major step up between 1 and X, and then smaller, more localized iterative ones for what each game needed to do for all preceding Switch ones, and this next step up is going to be another major one. So effectively, this is like an X.0 update to it, and is also being made with integration across all of Monolith and not just the Tokyo title development team in mind, and is being managed primarily by this new R&D team for the first time, so I think it's okay to still call it a new engine. It's not just being worked on for the Xenoblade games anymore, it's being designed as a more generic thing that Monolith can use on any project in any series, so it has to be more robust and have more use cases and redundancies built in, because the original version of this engine was designed for specifically a Xenoblade game, and so far it seems to have only been used for other Xenoblade games. So there's a lot of things that it just would naturally not have been equipped for from the beginning, but if it's being used as an integrated thing across the entire company, it's now going to have to be able to do. The thing to point out, though, is that they are still working on this. They want it to reach that completely integrated R&D team only point within the next 3 years, but are obviously still working on that while also working on game projects. So obviously a lot of people have been making buzz about there's probably something Monolith in 2025. That's not going to be using this fully upgraded version of the engine. Depending on what kind of IP it is, it might not be using any version of this engine whatsoever. There's likely to be some Xenoblade game in between now and one development cycle plus 3 years from now, so that is still going to just be using a not completely R&D team version that it was upgraded from the future redeemed iteration of this engine. So yes, we can say Monolith is making a new engine. We can't say they've made a new engine and their next game is going to be made with it, because 3 years to get that engine in the state they're looking for right now, and an entire game development cycle on top of that, is a very long time, and it would be crazy for Monolith to not put at least something out in between now and then. So it's going to be more like their second or third Switch 2 game that will be the first one using this engine in its complete form, as opposed to its first one, which is likely, again, coming out next year and might have been developed with also running on the Switch 1 in mind. This is purely speculation on my part, but it's possible that this is going to be the biggest revamp of the engine as a whole since they started using it for Xenoblade 1, because virtually every other time they've mentioned upgrading their engine or their general development environment for the Xenoblade series, it's been in relation to graphics. And while, again, this interview is conducted by an outlet literally called Computer Graphics World, they do talk about things other than graphics that they would like to work on, so it seems like the roadmap includes things other than stuff that will just make the next game look prettier. They might be revamping the underlying code base or some more fundamental aspects of the engine, more so than they have in the past, but we don't really know for sure, and probably won't until a game that comes out 5 years from now gets fully decompiled and data mined. CG World's next question. I hear that even major publishers are having trouble developing and maintaining in-house engines, and it is great that you are working on in-house production as a developer. Did you ever consider the option of using an engine made by another company? Takahashi's response. It's true that maintaining an in-house engine is difficult, but for the titles we are in charge of developing, we don't currently have the option of using engines made by other companies. This is because in-house engines are easier to customize to suit our needs and are easier to use. The simplest way to view this is just that Monolith, no matter how much they branch out, their main bread and butter is still going to be making Xenoblade games, and they've used a version of this very engine for every Xenoblade game, so they should probably keep using it if they're going to make more Xenoblade games that are similar to the previous ones in the future. But there's a bit more nuance just than that. This isn't really a thing about power brackets and how a lot of companies might be making engines to be used on PC, while even the Switch 2 is going to be a much less powerful system than that. That's not really the case. Pikmin 4 was made in Unreal, and honestly, this seems to partially be a cultural thing, as well as Monolith being very ambitious and wanting to experiment with every new game, so something that they can just tweak base parameters of on their own without having to work within the confines of licensing another company's engine also makes a lot of sense. Pikmin 4 being made in Unreal is a big exception because most first-party Nintendo games work on some sort of in-house engine. That's not to say Nintendo never licenses other companies for things, as the middleware Havok physics engine was used for a lot of recent first-party Nintendo things, and going back as far as Smash Brawl. And Intelligent Systems sometimes uses proprietary engines, like how they used the Origami King engine for the Thousand Year Door remake, but then Fire Emblem Engage was also made in Unity, which was certainly a drastic step up in both visuals and performance from Koei Tecmo using a version of the Warriors engine on Three Houses, so it is genuinely pretty impressive. I would have guessed that Engage was made with a proprietary engine if I didn't know that already, and either way, a developer custom making a game engine to best suit the kind of games they want to make is generally a good thing. So it's not like there's any sort of stigma or anything against using major licensed engines like Unreal or Unity, but a developer custom making their own engine that they're going to be more used to, they will have written the literal textbook on it themselves, and it's built to specifically cater to the kind of games they want to make, is generally a good sign and a reason to be excited. So the fact that Monolith is expanding the use of their Xenoblade engine, which they've already made as a proprietary thing for their most popular series, to potentially be used on other projects they make in the future, I think is worth being a little hyped about. One thing that should be taken as a machine-translated grain of salt is Takahashi saying the titles we are in charge of, because that implies they're working on multiple projects right now, and, well, again, this is another instance of him just using an English word. He says title, and Japanese as a language is ambiguous with plurals, so it's, without having proper context, very, very hard to tell if he meant this singularly or plurally. Realistically speaking, unless they're working on a new IP we don't know about, or they've been handed the reins on something else by Nintendo that we don't know about yet, the only titles Monolith is in charge of are the Xenoblade games. They do a lot of support work on various first-party Nintendo games, and they have a division that's largely in existence to support on the Zelda series, but they're not the primary developers of those. It might be reasonable to call them a co-developer of the two open-world Zelda games, but even then, as far as we know, according to interviews, the Monolith employees working on those were primarily in art, asset design, so modeling and maybe animation, and level design, and not necessarily anything that has to do with the underlying code base. And on top of that, Tears of the Kingdom either uses a heavily iterated or completely different engine to Breath of the Wild, as far as I know, one that was used on some first-party games Monolith did not touch whatsoever, even in the art department. So I think it's safer to say that Xenoblade and Zelda currently share DNA from an artistic level, but not necessarily as deep as the ones and zeros that actually make them up from a fundamental level. I also think it is worth repeating that this is a Monolith Soft engine for use by Monolith Soft on their games. We're not likely to see this used by other Nintendo teams, even though it was developed in-house at a studio completely owned by Nintendo. Now, that doesn't mean it will only show up in use in future Xeno games, Project Cross Zone 3 if that ever happens in some new Monolith IP, because it is a frequent practice for Nintendo EPD teams to partner with another internal or external developer and make a new entry in some Nintendo IP. So there is a chance we might see it used in another Nintendo IP if an EPD team conceptualizes and prototypes it, then has Monolith do the primary development on the final build of the game, where it would still be a co-developed project, but the Nintendo employees would be more idea people, while the Monolith employees would be doing the direct game development. There is obviously a lot of crossover between that and just Monolith making a game on their own, because even the Xenoblade games have some key Nintendo EPD staff in their higher-up credits, and all have one director that is employed specifically at Nintendo. Moving on to the next question. As for in-house game engines, you are mainly working on model rendering engines and effects engines. Inaba. For the model rendering engine, we are working on the module that outputs models from DCC, digital content creation, tools, materials, lighting, post-effects, and seamless map implementation. In the area of effects, we are working on the implementation of the effects engine on the runtime side and the development of effects tools. For example, here's a screenshot of the effects engine we're developing in-house. We use a node editor to create the effects system, but some designers are not good at using nodes and prefer to create effects based on properties, so we've created a hybrid system that allows effects to be created from nodes or properties. We have basically completed the development of the model output module, and are now developing lighting and materials for the visual expression of characters and backgrounds specific to each title. There's a lot of technical jargon in here and will be for the rest of the interview, and I'm not super confident in trying to talk about it in any remotely authoritative way, but this is primarily a visual-related thing, referring to 3D models, be they characters or environment, and visual effects. As of this interview, the thing they were currently focusing on was lighting and material effects, and by the way it's being described, the upgrades are partially allowing to differentiate between more visual styles on a game-by-game basis in the future. The biggest thing to take away from this, other than Monolith's games are going to look really, really pretty on this new iteration of the engine, is the whole seamless map thing, because that brings to mind a more pure open-world type game, and this is echoing something Takahashi said in his recruitment page for his new RPG project that I talked about a couple months ago. While it's easy to just immediately jump on this and say Xenoblade X or a new open world IP, it could also be the extension of the progression between Xenoblade 2 and Xenoblade 3, where 2 had a lot of loading zones in many smaller areas, while 3 has a very small amount of very large areas that are fully loaded in at any one time. As I mentioned then, official Japanese media about the Xenoblade series refers to all of the entries as open world games, so this isn't a good enough indication to say what the style of game they're making next is, just that they're going to continue improving overworld visuals and that kind of thing. So say it is a full open world like Xenoblade X, then we likely won't need to download massive data packs to make the physical version of the game run better, and there won't be as much pop-in on skip travel or very obvious things loading off in the distance if we're flying high in the air. If it is a more linear game in the Xenoblade 1 numbered game style, then it's likely that, in addition to maps being bigger and more detailed on a graphical level, there are also going to be either less or shorter loading zones between major areas. And we could see some sort of extension like how Future Redeemed was one big area with one big loading zone for the entire game, just you could only get to certain areas at certain points because of story locks or exploration things, only expanded to the size of a full RPG as opposed to a DLC campaign. As an aside about the hybrid effect-based system, it seems like Houdini is the software of choice for making effects based on some later screenshots they show, and that software is very heavily based around a node-based system, so it seems like another job of the R&D team is to effectively make custom plugins for the software all the developers across Monolith are using in order to have everyone using the same stuff, but in a way that better suits each person's style and strengths. Next question. Could you tell us more about animation-related R&D? Inaba. What we are currently working on in relation to animation is the development of modular rigs. Using these, each development section is creating rigs according to the title and animations using them. In addition, regarding simulation, for example, for hair movement, we're developing a module for secondary animation that bakes the simulations on DCC tools such as Houdini and reflects them at runtime. We're getting more into the tech jargon here, modular rigs, and people who are working on each title being able to make the rigs for that given title sounds like a very good idea, and it's not really stated what they were using up until now and how they did that kind of thing then, but this might also be simply improving the modular rigs to the standards of the new iteration of the engine, and not something completely new. And then to grossly oversimplify the Houdini thing, what I believe Inaba is saying here is that they are basically rendering detailed animations outside of the game, then baking them into the model or the animation script within the game to save on processing power for things that look really good and provide a lot of detail, like the movement of a character's hair or clothing, without having to dedicate a lot of processing power to the physics of how that would actually move in a given context. Next question. As for the third tool development for designers, you're also working on developing tools for Houdini, Substance 3D Designer, and Maya, right? Inaba. In Houdini, for example, we're working on the development of simulation and procedural placement tools. In the development of a recent title, we created a system for procedurally placing background elements using Houdini. This has allowed us to efficiently handle a volume of backgrounds that would be unattainable by hand. A task that would have taken 20 days to complete can now be done in just 30 minutes, which is a very significant accomplishment. We intend to continue to strengthen in this area. In the example shown here, that's the machine translation of Inaba's words, but this is a screenshot that was actually in the interview. All background assets, including roads, are placed procedurally, and the dirt and grass maps transition naturally near the roads. Although we can only show the wireframe in this example, a very natural transition has been achieved. Designers can now quickly build complex backgrounds simply by setting the path curve for the road. We're also working on utilizing procedural modeling to automatically generate destructible objects and create variations based on rules. I know procedural generation in video games sometimes carries a stigma, but they're not referring to gameplay in this. This is a tool for speeding up the creation of backgrounds, giving them appreciable detail without having to put as much effort into personally handcrafting them as they would for an actual playable area. Again, if they're continuing to make larger and more seamless game worlds, they're going to want to dedicate time towards the parts that you're going to see more up close. And having a way to streamline making the backgrounds and still have them look good is only a good thing. It frees up more time for them to focus on the details of the stuff right in front of you. As for the title that Monolith just worked on using procedural generations, I could not tell you what that is. While they do directly name drop it later, they rarely say game titles outright in the interview, so this probably is just Xenoblade 3, but it could theoretically, I guess, be something that they finished at least the tool development for that hasn't been revealed yet. And while I can't really speak for the backgrounds of Xenoblade 3 as a whole, especially because most of Ionios is traversable area, so all of the backgrounds are just lower poly versions of other areas that had full bespoke level design given in them, at the very least, the background of one specific, mostly cutscene area at the end of Future Redeemed looks like it might have been procedurally generated just based on FreeCam zooming into it, and it is not to the detail they're showing off in this tech demo, which is very exciting because they're already showing off an improvement over the most recent game they've released. Part 4. Collaboration with the title development section. CG World. I think close cooperation between the title development section and the R&D team is necessary, so how do you communicate between the two? Inaba. We hold regular meetings to communicate. Since I'm also involved in title development myself, I frequently attend meetings and act as a bridge between the two. If a difficult task arises in the title development section, we bring it back to the R&D team and work on it as a research issue. This question is largely redundant because, well, we already know that the R&D team was formed by people from title development, so they already know other people there and how to communicate to them. And they most likely are still using the same offices, so they share office space with them and can just physically go and talk to them. But this does confirm, one, Inaba is still working in title development, so despite sitting out Future Redeemed, he is still involved in direct game development to some degree. Now, I wasn't thinking that, oh, he's just going to stop being credited on games from now on, because obviously developing tools and the engine for game development means you still contributed to game development, but this implies that we might see him just in the regular list of programmers or even in a lead programmer position like he did before, once again. This also hammers home why having a dedicated team for this kind of thing is such a good idea, because it's as he says, if the title developers run into a problem, they can just talk to Inaba, he'll bring it back to the R&D team, they'll work on a fix for it, while the title developers can just go keep developing other sections of the game, and then once the fix arrives, they can implement that. It is smoother, and it means the people directly working on the games can save time. Good things happen when you're efficient at working on stuff. Next question. How do you prioritize your research assignments? Inaba. Basically, we work on them based on the priority of the work. However, even if an issue arises later, if it's deemed to be highly urgent and directly linked to improving quality or reducing labor hours, we raise the priority and respond flexibly. Basic logistics, this makes sense. Next up, CG World. I see. So basically the R&D team works based on the needs of title development. Besides that, are there any issues that the R&D team proposes and tackles? Inaba. Yes, there are cases like that. For example, the R&D team researched a simulation to make hair look beautiful, and that technology was adopted in the title. In the future, we would like to strengthen the team structure and establish a system where employees can propose their own research topics. So, again, a bottom-up thing, individual employees being able to propose their own things and work on them themselves maybe, is generally a good idea for allowing more ideas to enter the creative space, and that just tends to make things better overall and is a healthier working environment. But again, we have Inaba referring to a recent title. This time there's really no point in talking about it. Inaba directly says the R&D team worked on this hair method. The R&D team did not exist until after Future Redeemed was basically done, so this must be an unreleased title that we most likely don't know anything about. This doesn't tell us anything about what that game actually is, of course, because unless Monolith was tapped to make a Pac-Man game, no matter what they're doing, it's going to have characters with hair in it, so this doesn't tell us anything other than the fact that the next game is going to have hair that looks even better than like M and N's hair did in Xenoblade 3, so that's actually kind of exciting, I guess. Games are going to be very pretty. CG World. So the R&D team is also responsible for running study sessions within the company. Inaba. Yes, that's right. Until now, we ran them jointly with the development sections of each title, but now the R&D team is in charge of running the study sessions. For example, after CEDEC, which is a Japanese game developer conference, we conduct a survey within the company and plan meetings and roundtable discussions to pick out and explain particularly good lectures. For GDC, since the lectures are in English, engineers pick them out and create materials to explain them in an easy-to-understand way. Again, we need to keep praising the level of organization Monolith is achieving just by creating this team, basically. They've not only formalized, but also created a full system from listening to lectures by other experienced developers and learning from them in a collaborative way. This is only a good thing for development, and I'm so glad that Monolith is so humble and willing to learn from other people that they're basically just making it an integrated part of their meetings twice a year to go over interesting things other people in the industry have been doing. Case in point, CG World. It's great that such efforts are properly incorporated into the work rather than being part of a staff's after-hours activities. Also, this is just anti-crunch because I'm sure a lot of developers will be looking at this stuff on their own time anyway, so if they're doing it while on the clock, that's more time after work. They're not just thinking of work, and they can maintain a better work-life balance, which is good for anyone involved, really, because that means they make a better product. The interviewer basically echoes what I just said. It's great that such efforts are properly incorporated into the work rather than being part of the staff's after-hours activities. Takahashi, thank you. From a management perspective, we have properly organized it as part of our work so as to not exploit the motivation of our staff. From a field perspective, we aim to improve our technology by documenting and sharing useful information, and we also value stimulating the feelings of people who love technology. This is, I'm guessing, Takahashi's rationale for why there is a monthly tech blog on Monolith's website, because not only are they collaborating and taking in what other developers have to say, they're also paying it forward by sharing some of their insights and developments with us, like this article and like the tech blog, which is honestly really cool. Game developers who are able to read Japanese, please look through the tech blog. I'm not sure everything you find there will be applicable to your own projects, but it's always nice to know what other people are doing for something. And hey, maybe you can be inspired by one of the developers that made some of your favorite games, and maybe even a developer you might want to work with someday. CG World. How often do you hold study sessions? Inaba. For large-scale events like CEDC and GDC, we hold them once a year. Other study sessions are currently held irregularly. For example, we hold them at the initiative of each team when they want to share the knowledge gained in the development of each title. They literally took the, "Oh, is your Xenoblade so cool? Would you like to share with the class?" meme and just did it in real life. I can't imagine most developers are like this, even ones that are big enough to have multiple teams like Monolith does. This seems too good to be true to be regular in the industry. And given all the horror stories about the industry I've heard, especially lately, Monolith is unfortunately a very rare breed when it comes to developers that are good at things, just in general. CG World. Are the contents of the study sessions and the company's know-how available for viewing as documents? Inaba. Yes, in the past, the know-how of each title development section was closed, and there was duplication of work within the company because the information was not known to each other. However, since the launch of the R&D team, we have been conscious of visualizing information. Currently, these materials are posted on the company's internal website, and staff from other sections can also view them. CG World. You also publish a tech blog for external audiences. How do you manage this? Inaba. We ask each section to write a tech blog about once a month within the company. We select articles from these and post them on the tech blog for external audiences. Not only the R&D team, but also staff members in the title development section write for the blog. The blog is written during work hours, and we intend to continue to actively disseminate information that can be made public in order to contribute to the industry. I have nothing else to add that I haven't already said before, but it might just be peak, guys. In slightly more serious news, although this is effectively just trivia, the tech blog goes back to 2022, so it's not surprising that people on title development have contributed to it because it significantly predates the R&D team. Part 5. We want to work with people who can pursue the Monolith Soft style together. CG World. The R&D team has a lot to deal with and seems very busy, but are there any challenges you are currently facing in development? Takahashi. The biggest challenge is, without a doubt, a lack of manpower. Inaba. At present, the team is somehow functioning, but we still need more manpower to aim for even higher quality. Looking ahead, we would like to have new members who enjoy drawing-related development join us. We would like to expand our members to tackle various challenges, such as the challenges we are facing in the most recent title development, and generalizing expressions we want to develop in the medium to long term. This isn't really surprising. Monolith is known for their ambition, so it makes sense for their biggest problem to be not having enough people to work on all the projects they want to do quite yet. And that's of course exacerbated by the fact that this is a relatively young team pulling from existing Monolith employees, and they're only now looking to recruit people from outside the company to join it. As for the last part, again, there's nothing to talk about here. Of course they're making another game right now as we speak, and right now as I record this, because it is the middle of the day in Japan. They weren't just going to take a break from doing anything after Future Redeemed for a couple years. They've been working on their next project, and probably the project after that, since before base Xenoblade 3 came out. There's literally zero hints as to the identity of whatever Monolith is working on right now anywhere in this article, so we shouldn't be speculating on it. They're making something, they're getting ambitious, and they need more people to work on it, and that is enough to get me excited, regardless of what it is. Next question. CG World. In terms of personnel required for the R&D team, would you say that veteran title developers and people with experience in engine development are better? Or would you say that academics who can read and apply GDC and SIGGRAPH papers are needed? For context, SIGGRAPH is a massive CG conference that's been held since 1974. It also has its own Asia-exclusive spin-off, and it will actually be in Monolith's hometown this year, as that will be December 3rd through 6th in Tokyo for 2024. Anyway, Inaba's response to this is, we need personnel from both sides, but currently we have several staff members with academic backgrounds in the company, so we are mainly looking for veteran developers with experience. However, we believe that passion for exploring drawing engines and research and development is more important than years of experience. So, they're looking for experienced people, but a passionate newcomer is also welcome because it's the drive that matters, man. I know what they're getting at here. I'm making fun of it a little bit, but it's good that they're not just completely ignoring newbies because they don't have experience, because, again, good ideas can come from anywhere. Also, hey, didn't Bandai Namco just lose a bunch of employees? Maybe this conveniently placed Monolith Soft recruitment posting will entice some of them. It would be really neat if a lot of these developers who are just getting shed from a major company are able to get back on their feet and get a new position in the industry quickly. Hopefully one that respects them better and gives them actual job security, like it seems like Nintendo has and basically no one else does right about now. CG World. Please tell us about the type of people you're looking for to tackle each of these issues. Inaba. First of all, in order to strengthen procedural expressions, we've already proven the effectiveness of developing tools for designers using Houdini and Substance 3D Designer in title development. Therefore, we would like to invite Houdini experts to the company. Specifically, we would like to challenge various issues such as procedural modeling, procedural placement of backgrounds, modeling and simulation of hair, etc. It's fine if you use tools other than Houdini, like Blender. Next, we would also like to have people who are interested in developing in-house engines. If you're an experienced developer who likes to explore unique technologies that cannot be achieved with general-purpose engines, I think this team will provide you with very valuable experience. It may sound sensational, but I feel that the visuals rendered by an in-house engine show the uniqueness of that engines. We are sometimes told by customers who've seen games developed by Monolith that this is Monolith Soft's visuals, so we'd be happy to work with people who share this uniqueness and are willing to work with us with a strong sense of commitment. Basically, we're looking for experienced people, but we also welcome people who are pursuing world-class technical expression at university. Furthermore, in order to strengthen animation expression, in addition to implementing secondary animation using rigs and simulations as I mentioned earlier, we would also like to explore animation expression at runtime, such as IK and retargeting. We would be happy to welcome people who have experience as an animator and have experience implementing games, including runtime expression. We would also like to work together on utilizing Houdini's KineFX. For reference, IK stands for Inverse Kinematics, it is an animation technique, and retargeting is the process of taking animation from one character and applying it to another. KineFX is a module within Houdini for character rigging and animation that allows for very robust editing within the actual software. Much of this is just straightforward. They're looking for people who are good at the things that they're currently experimenting with and trying to get better at, and also goes back to referencing Monolith Soft having a unique visual style, which is true, but in this case is for much more of a broad context for the company as a whole, because usually when it's been mentioned before, it's been wanting a unique look for the Xenoblade series that's as iconic as Tetsuya Nomura for Final Fantasy. In this case, it seems like they're content with knowing that Monolith games look like Monolith games, and the fact that they're not just saying Xenoblade again here suggests that, okay, maybe there is a new IP somewhere, or Xenosaga, or whatever. Obviously, if Xenosaga gets remade, they're going to get as close to the visual style that they've been using in Xenoblade since 2017, and honestly, if they know that they have that brand now, I would not be surprised if, even if they change character designer to someone other than Masasuke Saito for the next Xenoblade game, the same broad strokes visual style will be kept in the series for the foreseeable future. I know this is a new arc, they can mix things up a whole lot, but at the same time, you have to stick with what's succeeded, and I think the visuals of the Xenoblade series on the Switch are a big reason why it has succeeded, even though they do get some hate sometimes as well. CG World. Is there still a shortage of people for animation-related development? Inaba. Yes, that's right. We're having a hard time finding TAs who can do simulations, so we're having a hard time securing human resources. If you're interested in this field, we would love to have you join our team. We welcome people from animation studios as well as the game industry. One thing I've neglected to mention about Houdini as a software is that it has implementations for animation as well as video games, and that is probably where it had its biggest impact because it's been used by virtually every major studio, either for CG of live action movies or just purely animated movies. It completely makes sense why someone from the animation industry would also be qualified for using the software in the way it's being described here for game development. And once again, it's good that they're having such an open mind and not being very strict on limiting it to experienced video game developers, which admittedly is probably also because if they did limit it a lot, there would not be that many people that could potentially join. CG World. What are your plans for strengthening the development environment? Inaba. To strengthen the development environment, we're working on a wide range of issues, including automating asset data conversion, streamlining the build environment using Jenkins, automatic testing, automatic bug detection, and load measurement. We're also looking for people who can work on these areas with particular focus. For example, in Xenoblade 3, we placed characters on various maps to measure load, visualize CPU and GPU load on heat maps, and performed nighttime tests with automated play. We would like to further strengthen these mechanisms. Jenkins is another piece of software. It's basically just used for automating things in software development, like the kind of things Inaba's talking about here. In addition to directly improving visuals and design, it seems like a lot of things the R&D team are focused on right now are for the purpose of, for lack of a better term, automating the boring bits of game development, like some bug detecting, some system optimization, some resource testing. And while I'm not entirely sure what's meant by asset data conversion, each iteration of the engine is going to be different, so even if you are reusing assets from a previous game, you would need to change around things. I believe there's an interview somewhere where someone from Monolith talked about Xenoblade Definitive Edition, and how the original plan was to purely port over most of the assets from the original game, and they originally tried to do something automated for that, but weren't able to completely automate it, so they had to do more things manually than originally intended, and that led to some developers remastering more models and improving more textures than were originally planned, which was a good thing in the long run, but was something that they originally didn't plan on doing, and it seems like this would help out on something like that in the future, because reusing assets is good in game development. It's how we get games that don't take 8 years to make. And, well, they've been reusing animation since Xenoblade X, and if they had to re-input all of that every single time they brought the same animation into a later game, it would be nice to just kind of have that running in the background on a PC that's not really being used for any intensive work, while you spend more time working on the actual new stuff for the new game instead. Even porting assets between build versions of the same game can sometimes take time, so again, the less menial labor is taken out of the process, the more creative labor can be put into the process, and like, hey, this is what we should be relying on machines to automate out of the creative process, not the act of creating and making art as a human being. That's the part that should stay. That's the part that they're emphasizing here with all the stuff they're working on. They're doing this whole using tech to automate things correctly, unlike, once again, way too many other companies in this and other industries. This is also the only time a specific game title is mentioned anywhere in this interview as specifically techniques they used on Xenoblade 3 and would be looking to improve in future titles, so maybe every other time they mention working on a specific game title and didn't say it, it's for some unannounced project or another. Again, it doesn't really say anything. These are techniques they're planning on using in every game going on, and building an engine and framework for every project across the company, not just Xenoblade. So them using these things that they're planning to make a universal Monolith thing on some Monolith project isn't worth speculating about. Lastly, we have Part 6, what the R&D team aims to achieve. CG World. Finally, please tell us about the future prospects for the R&D team. Inaba. First of all, we would like to work on strengthening our team structure while also taking on the various challenges we've discussed today. As an R&D department, we may be shunned by some because we are not directly involved in the development of games, but we truly enjoy exploring technologies for game development. We believe that pursuing technology is cool, and our R&D team is made up of members who share these values. By building a team with such passion, we hope to improve the technology of the team as a whole, and ultimately contribute to the company as a whole, and the industry as a whole. CG World concludes with a simple arigato gozaimashita, which I was actually able to tell what Japanese word that was, just by knowing some of the hiragana and the context of where it appeared. I guess I'm learning things. I know 0 kanji that are not in the titles of Trails games, but I guess I'm learning things as slow as it is. So yeah, not only does Monolith create products that are very good in ways that I just fundamentally vibe with, they also have a very similar philosophy to me, and that is just that science and technology is cool. It is fun to learn new things and develop solutions to problems, especially if they help out other people. Like, yes, this is a job. People are doing this for money, and while they are improving things for other people, it is other employees at the company they all work for. But also, they're researching cool technologies to help other people make better art. And though that might be primarily PR speak, I can't help but respect that, because honestly, even the PR speak from most game developers has been talking about driving up profits, where here Monolith is talking about, alright, we don't really care if we don't get considered game developers or are looked down upon because we're not working on the final builds of games. We're doing this because it's going to make the games our company makes better, and we are going to share our secrets with the industry to some degree. I ran out of ways to say Monolith is just built different years ago, but I'm not going to stop because I've yet to be wrong on that. For one last thing before the end of the video, let's go back to that clip that was on Monolith's page for the R&D team that I talked about basically at the beginning.
Major spoilers for Xenogears, by the way. Stop watching the video now if you don't want those. This is the end anyway.
This is just different views of a scene. We don't even know if this is background or if this is an intended tech demo for a main playable area, and this is a tech demo. I'm going to be very clear here. This environment is not likely to show up anywhere in a future Monolith soft game. This is a video they put together to communicate what the R&D team does to both potential applicants to a position working there and to the layperson that goes through this page out of curiosity. The second half is pretty cool. It's showing off demos of a stone effect and some particle effects in fairly familiar colors. And the name of the program they're using is even called EtherFX Editor, which, as far as I can tell, is not a publicly available program, or at least searchable on the English internet. So does that mean Monolith named their proprietary fork of Houdini after the magic from the Xeno series? Because once again, that is something I would do myself if I was in that kind of position. I just have the same brain chemistry as the founding principles of this company, apparently, which is why I like their games so much. Anyway, the front half of the clip is just demoing different in-development views of this neat Rocky Valley environment. This does not appear to be taken from at least a recent Monolith game, as there aren't really any evergreen trees in Ionios. This does not match any area from Xenoblade 3 anyway, and this is just kind of not what things look like in Hyrule in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, which, once again, did not use a version of the engine Monolith is currently developing, so I don't think they would use that in an advertisement for the R&D team that's set to make the engine. It also seems like the big path through the center of the screen is supposed to be water, based on how it's blue and nothing else is in some of the wireframe shots, but the small path-looking things on the hill to the right are supposed to be roads. Now, This, and the fact that there's stuff dotting around that could be small rocks or foliage, this is just an example of how they're using these new technologies to generate the environments. But why did the environment they chose to make look kind of like the valley from the ending of Xenogears? I'm not crazy in seeing it, right? It's not there when the textured version with color is shown, but in some of the wireframes and textureless model shots, you could see a thing that kinda looks like the ruined Catamony from that very iconic shot from the end of Gears, right on the little hillock to the right of the river, and just the general location of a forested area with tons of green but still some rocky outcroppings, primarily in big flat plateaus with a river running through the middle of it, looks more like the Gears thing than anything else I remember. At most, this is someone on the R&D team suggesting building a reference environment based on the proto-Monolith soft game and originator of the Xeno series that they're still making to this day, but it would be really cool if they did that. It could also be a coincidence, or I'm just crazy in seeing things, but either way, I thought that was kind of neat. And I thought this entire interview was kind of neat. Usually, when game developers open up a lot about their philosophy and the projects they work on, it's from a game design perspective, or even purely from a story perspective. And those are cool and valuable, and honestly, would be things that I would be able to understand better than this. But knowing all of these things they're thinking about on a technical level gives me a lot of hope and a lot of hype as well. They're not just being ambitious with the kind of game they want to make, they have the tech and are actively working on improving the tech to back that up and actually fully realize their ambition, more or less right out the gate with being given better hardware to work with. It's just good to get all these varied looks behind the curtain we've been getting fairly recently. I would have loved for the Xenoblade 3 art book to include more actual concept art instead of just references with the characters' final designs, but I don't know, maybe with the next game we'll get a bit better on that front. It's exciting. And it's not going to be long. It better not be long. I hate being wrong on this consistently. Until we really learn what they've been cooking. And until next time, which genuinely might just be after we learn what they're cooking, but probably not given my luck and precedent, this is Luxon, signing off.